Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a world in the Ultima Segmentum, far from the golden light of terror, where the air itself is trying to kill you, where the water is poison, where the ground is infected, where even the flowers are engineered by some dark providence to dissolve anything that dares to breathe near them. A world where children learn to shoot before they can walk, where half of all infants never see their second birthday, and where the surviving half spend the next decade discovering whether they are strong enough, fast enough, and lucky enough to be counted among the 25 out of every 100 who actually reach adolescence. A world that has repelled demonic invasions, orcish war hordes, and chaos space marine assaults, not through any external relief force or heroic intervention from the wider Imperium, but because the planet itself, that savage, dripping, roaring green cathedral of death, simply consumed the invaders and left nothing behind but quiet jungle and legend. That world is Katakan, and it has a population, voluntary inhabitants, people who were born there, who grew up there, who lived and loved and raised families there, who built communities against impossible odds and then rebuilt them again when the jungle tore those communities apart. And who, in an act that the rest of the Imperium finds somewhere between baffling and deeply impressive, choose, in whatever sense the word choice applies to humans in the 41st millennium, to remain. Welcome back to Q on 40k. Today, we are going into the deep green. Today, we are stepping through the canopy, where the vines reach for your wrists before you've even noticed they're moving, and the air sits thick and sweet with toxins that will melt your lungs before you've registered that you've been breathing something other than air. Today, we're going to spend a very long, slow, deeply atmospheric stretch of time doing something simple but genuinely difficult, actually living on Katakan, understanding what it means to wake up there, what it means to feed a child there, what it means to build a wall there, sure knowing that by morning, the jungle will have already begun consuming the mortar. What it means to love someone there, knowing the statistical reality of what the planet does to people over time. What it means to be old there, which on Katakan means something different than it means anywhere else, because reaching old age on Katakan is itself an achievement that most of the galaxy will never fully appreciate. This is going to be a long one. This is a lore video for people who want to really sit inside a piece of the Warhammer universe and understand it from the inside out. So get comfortable. Let the ambient sounds of the jungle work their way into the background of wherever you are. Take it slow. Let's go. Part 1. The name that makes other death worlds flinch. Before we talk about what life is like on Katakan, we need to properly understand what Katakan is. Not just intellectually. Not in the casual way you might understand that something is classified as dangerous. We need to understand it on a gut level, because if you approach this planet the way you might approach any other hostile environment in the 40k setting, a hive world with crime, a forge world with pollution, even another death world with dangerous predators, you will underestimate it catastrophically. And underestimating Katakan is one of the most reliable ways to die that the galaxy has ever produced. Katashan is classified as the most infamous death world in the Imperium of man. That's not a casual distinction awarded to the winner of some bureaucratic competition. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. Among those 1,000,000 worlds, there are deserts that extend across entire continents, where the sand itself is sharp enough to shred unprotected flesh. There are ice worlds where the temperature drops low enough in winter to freeze promethium in its tanks. There are radiation-scoured wastelands, plus volcanic hellscapes, worlds under permanent warp taint, worlds where the sky rains acid, worlds where the seas are made of something that once was water and is now something considerably worse. The Imperium has seen all of it, catalogued all of it, and in that entire gallery of planetary horror, Katakan sits at the head of the table and has held that position for as long as anyone has been keeping records. What makes Katashan unique among death worlds? What earns it that specific, or particular kind of infamy that makes even hardened veterans of the Imperial Guard go quiet when someone mentions it, is not just that it's hostile to human life. Many worlds are hostile to human life. Katashan is something else entirely. Katashan appears to be actively, intelligently hostile to human life. Not in a supernatural sense, not in the way a demon world is infused with malevolent intent from the warp, but in the way that a perfectly calibrated ecosystem, and shaped by millions of years of brutal evolutionary pressure and perhaps something more deliberate still, produces something that operates as though it has a single unified purpose: eliminate everything that doesn't belong here. Every plant on Katashan is poisonous. Not some plants, not most plants, not the majority, every single one. Every plant species that has ever been documented on that world produces compounds that will harm, maim, or kill any organism that is not native to Katashan. The air is saturated with microscopic toxic spores released by various fungi and plant forms, invisible clouds of biological weaponry drifting through the humid atmosphere on thermals and wind currents, finding their way into lungs, eyes, open cuts, finding every vulnerability in the biological machinery of any organism unfortunate enough to be breathing without a military-grade filtration system. The water is contaminated with pathogens, biotoxins, as in living organisms so small that no filtration system, short of exceptional equipment, can reliably remove them. The soil itself harbors necrotic bacteria that wait, patient as geological time, for anything to leave an open wound exposed long enough for them to colonize it and begin the quiet, methodical work of decomposing the wound from the inside. And that's before you get to the animals, or the plants that are also animals in the sense that they hunt actively and intelligently, or the insects, or the things that exist in some uncomfortable grey area between categories and resist any attempt at easy classification. Space Marines are said to avoid Katashan. That line appears in the records, and it's worth pausing on, because that sentence should not be possible. Space Marines are 10-foot-tall, genetically engineered post-human killing machines, wearing powered armor, capable of stopping most conventional weapons fire, with 2 hearts, multiple redundant organs, an enhanced immune system capable of metabolizing most toxins, enhanced healing factors that can close wounds in minutes that would take a normal human days to recover from, and centuries of accumulated combat experience across every kind of hostile environment the galaxy produces. They are the Imperium's finest warriors, the apex predators of human martial capability, and they are said to avoid Katashan. Not because they're afraid, because even they perform the calculation and determine that the casualty rate on Katashan is higher than the operational benefit justifies for most missions. When the Adeptus Astartes decide something isn't worth the risk, you are looking at something truly extraordinary. And yet there are people there. Living people, communities of them, families, children, culture, tradition. Stories told around fires that burn inside walls of dense stone, is surrounded by kilometers of laboriously cleared jungle, because the trees themselves will creep back in the night if you give them the opportunity. These people have names and histories and traditions and pride and humor, and they have maintained all of those things on the most lethal piece of inhabited real estate in the known galaxy for 10,000 years, and the planet has not beaten them yet. Those people are the Katashans, and understanding their world, or understanding what they face every single day, is what this video is about. Part 2. How humans ended up in hell. The story of the first colonists. The story of Katashan's colonization is one of the oldest and most sobering cautionary tales in Imperial history, which is saying something given how thick the Imperial archives are with cautionary tales. It happened during the Dark Age of technology, that ancient, glittering, terrible period of human expansion across the stars before the Age of Strife shattered everything and plunged humanity into 10,000 years of fragmented darkness. In that era, humanity moved outward with something approaching confidence. They had faster-than-light travel. They had advanced terraforming technology. They had computational systems sophisticated enough to analyze planetary data and determine habitability before committing colony ships full of thousands of people to a one-way journey across the stars. The probes sent to the star system that would eventually be known as the Katakan system came back with data that looked, on every measurable metric, promising. Lush vegetation, indicating an oxygen-rich atmosphere, abundant liquid water, stable tectonic activity, temperatures within human comfort ranges, a biosphere rich in organic complexity, which in most contexts means food and resources and ecological diversity that can support human settlement. From orbit, the planet was a deep, saturated emerald green, a jewel gleaming in the dark of space, exactly the kind of world that colonial administrators in the dark age of technology would have circled on their charts and flagged as a priority. "Come here," the data said. "Make your home here. Everything you need is already growing." The first colony ships came, and something went wrong during the landing. The records don't specify exactly what happened, because the records from that period are fragmentary, partially the result of the Age of Strife's disruption to the archival systems that would have preserved the details, and partially because the event itself was so catastrophic and immediate that coherent record-keeping was genuinely not anyone's primary concern during the hours and days that followed. The ships crash-landed. Perhaps there was something in the atmospheric data that the probes hadn't captured, some quality of the air or weather systems that created impossible turbulence. Perhaps electromagnetic interference from the planet's biology affected navigation. Perhaps the planet, yet in some way that defies rational classification, but that the 40k setting occasionally gestures toward, simply didn't want to be approached gently. The colonists survived the crash. That much is confirmed. The ships themselves were too damaged for liftoff, and rescue was not coming. The dark age of technology was not a period of robust interstellar emergency services. Whatever signal the colony ships managed to send before communications failed, whatever desperate messages their astropaths transmitted, no relief arrived. The colonists were on the surface of Katakan. They were there to stay, and then the jungle, which had been waiting with the patience of something that has never had a concept of time, noticed them. The accounts of those first days are fragmentary at best, preserved in oral traditions that the Katakans eventually carried forward through generations of retelling, each iteration adding and losing details, until what remains is more myth than history, but myth that contains the essential truth. The colonists discovered very quickly that the world they had been promised, that green, abundant, welcoming paradise the probe data had suggested, was not what was waiting for them on the ground. The vegetation that had appeared so inviting from orbit was universally inedible to human biology, and in most cases, actively toxic on contact or ingestion. The water that had shown up in probe data as abundant and clean was contaminated with microorganisms that the probes had not been designed to detect, organisms that had no analog in the pathogen databases the colonial medical teams had brought with them. The air itself, warm and heavy and rich with moisture, carried spore loads that the probes hadn't flagged because the spores were at low enough concentrations to appear benign at the monitoring level. But that attacked the respiratory systems of people breathing it continuously in ways that became apparent over days and weeks. Animals emerged from the undergrowth with a territorial fury that the colonists, who had prepared for an empty world, or at most a world of ordinary fauna, had no preparation for. The learning curve was paid in lives. This is the bald, direct way to say it, because there is no gentle way to say it. People died discovering that the water was contaminated, and because someone drank it first. People died discovering the properties of various plant species because someone touched or brushed against them first. People died discovering the hunting patterns of the fauna because something came out of the darkness and they hadn't yet built adequate defenses. Every piece of knowledge that kept the colony alive was bought with the death of someone who didn't have it yet. And yet they didn't go extinct, somehow. Against odds that any probability assessment would have placed at near zero, the colonists held on. We don't know who made the first crucial discoveries about filtration and water purification, using the technology they had brought with them. We don't know who first understood that firelight deterred a significant portion of the nocturnal predators, at least at sufficient intensity. Well, we don't know who made the first systematic survey of what plants could be approached with limited danger and which would react with immediate violence. But someone did all of these things, and others learned from them, and the colony, barely inch by inch paying for every meter of understanding with blood, survived its first winter and its second, and eventually, something like equilibrium was reached between the colonists' growing knowledge and the planet's inexhaustible capacity for finding new ways to kill them. This is the origin story of the Catechans. No heroic decision to colonize a challenging frontier world. No bold pioneers choosing hardship for the sake of glory or empire building. Just a crash landing, an impossible situation, and the grim, patient decision to keep breathing because the alternative was worse. From that wreckage, from that desperate corner, the ancestors of what would become the most feared light infantry in the Imperium of man built their home. And over 10,000 years, they and their descendants were shaped, physically, culturally, psychologically, by the pressure of living in a place that never stopped trying to kill them. When the Emperor's Great Crusade eventually found Catachan, the people who met the Crusade's forces had been living with this pressure for so long that they had internalized it completely. The Departamento Munitorum officials who assessed the planet's tithe potential looked at what Catachan had produced in its inhabitants and recognized something extraordinary. These were soldiers who had been trained by the harshest possible conditions to a standard no military academy anywhere in the Imperium could replicate. Because no academy could afford the casualty rate that Catachan's training program imposed on its students. That observation led to an arrangement that has defined Catachan's relationship with the Imperium ever since, and we'll return to it in detail later. But first, we need to understand the present-day reality of what those first colonists' descendants live with every single day. As Part 3, The Living Jungle, A World That Hunts. Here is the thing about Catachan that even experienced 40k readers sometimes don't fully absorb. It's not just that the jungle has dangerous things in it. That would be manageable. That would be a threat environment that could be mapped, studied, and eventually mitigated through careful application of technology and preparation and the right kinds of defenses. The problem with Catachan is that the jungle appears to be a threat environment that actively adapts to resist exactly those kinds of mitigation efforts. The Adeptus Mechanicus Magi, biologists, who have attempted to study Catachan, at great personal risk, it should be noted, with significant attrition among their research teams, and a near total inability to maintain long-term observation posts, have documented something remarkable and deeply unsettling. When humans build a settlement on Catachan, that the jungle does not simply continue behaving as it normally does, indifferent to the new structures that have appeared in its midst. The jungle changes. The plant life in the vicinity of new construction begins to shift over time, producing new growth patterns oriented toward the structures, extending tendrils and root systems in directions that suggest not random growth, but directed response. A species of carnivorous flora that typically inhabit the mid-canopy relocate toward the perimeter of cleared areas, establishing themselves in positions that better allow them to interact with whatever is inside. The density of hostile fauna in the surrounding region increases as predators are drawn toward the new food source the settlement represents. None of this would be especially unusual in a normal ecosystem where predators follow prey concentrations. What is unusual is the speed of the adaptation and the character of it. Catachan does not simply attract predators to its human settlements the way any ecosystem might respond to a new food source. It produces, within relatively short periods, new vectors of attack that appear tailored to the specific defenses the settlement has erected. Plants near settlement walls develop more aggressive root systems capable of penetrating stone and mortar, faster than those root systems should be able to grow. Species that previously inhabited only deep jungle appear at the perimeter within months of a settlement being established. The ecosystem seems to assess the defenses and respond to them in ways that suggest something more than simple animal instinct or plant tropism. And this observation has led some researchers, the particularly courageous, or perhaps the particularly reckless, to propose that Katakan's biosphere functions as something approaching a unified organism, not sentient in the way humans understand sentience. Nothing on Katakan is capable of sitting down and formulating a tactical plan in any language, but operating through some distributed biological information system. Chemical signals transmitted through the enormous fungal mycelial networks that underlie much of the jungle floor, spore communications, the interconnected root systems of species that have been growing alongside each other for millions of years. The ecosystem of Katakan may share something like a distributed environmental awareness. It hunts, not as individual creatures hunt, each for themselves, but as a system, coordinated at a level too subtle for individual observation to capture, but visible in aggregate across the behavior of the entire biosphere. This theory remains contested. The Adeptus Mechanicus is, as an institution, deeply skeptical of any explanation that attributes intelligence to biological systems that lack the appropriate neural complexity, because accepting such an explanation raises uncomfortable questions about the boundary between intelligence and mechanism. But the circumstantial evidence is difficult to dismiss completely, and the practical implications are stark, regardless of which theoretical framework you accept. It means that building on Katakan is not a one-time effort that produces a stable result. Every settlement is in a constant, active, ongoing competition with the jungle around it. The jungle pushes, the humans push back. The jungle assesses, adapts, and pushes again. Every wall that stands requires maintenance, and every cleared zone that remains clear requires daily effort. Every defense that was adequate last month may be inadequate this month, because the organisms surrounding the settlement have had a month to develop new approaches. And eventually, in almost every case the records have captured, the jungle wins. Settlements on Katakan are not permanent. No human settlement on Katakan is ever truly permanent. At some point, the pressure builds to a critical threshold. As the defenses are compromised, a wall section weakens, a predator finds a gap in the coverage, a disease outbreak reduces the population's capacity to maintain the perimeter, and the survivors gather what they can carry and move on to start the whole process over again, somewhere else. There is something both tragic and extraordinary about this cycle. These communities that have built something, walls, structures, is some modicum of safety, abandoning it all and disappearing into the very jungle that drove them out, carrying their knowledge and their wounded and their children, finding a new place, and beginning again. It is an existence that would break most people's. The Katakans have been doing it for 10,000 years, and the doing of it has made them what they are. The climate itself functions as a weapon in Katakan's arsenal. The planet is tropical in character, uniformly hot and humid across most of its surface, with no appreciable seasons in most regions. The constant warmth and moisture that makes the jungle so spectacularly productive also makes it an ideal breeding environment for bacteria, fungi, parasitic organisms, and any number of microscopic life forms that find the human body a desirable and nutritious host. The same conditions that produce lush, aggressive plant growth produce lush, aggressive microbial growth. Disease on Katakan is not an exceptional event that occurs when normal conditions break down. Disease on Katakan is a baseline condition that inhabitants are perpetually managing, treating, and surviving. Foot rot, a fungal infection of the extremities, can begin to establish itself within a few weeks of exposure to the jungle floor without appropriate protective footwear and treatment protocols. Left unaddressed, it progresses to the point where the infected tissue detaches entirely from the underlying bone and muscle, a process the sources describe in clinical terms that nonetheless communicate the visceral horror of the outcome. That is a condition that can happen within weeks on Katakan, in people who are being reasonably careful. Most of the diseases Katakan produces are considerably faster acting. The air, as mentioned, is perpetually seeded with toxic spores. These spores come from a variety of sources: specialized fungi, certain plant species that use airborne toxin distribution as both a defense mechanism and a method of clearing competing vegetation from their immediate vicinity, and organisms that release their reproductive materials into the atmosphere in clouds that serve the dual purpose of propagation and deterring anything that might consume them. For organisms native to Katakan, evolved over millions of years in this atmospheric chemistry, these spores are simply part of the air. For human lungs, they are a persistent, low-grade assault that requires continuous management through filtration technology, medical prophylactics, and the gradual development of whatever immune tolerance generations of exposure can produce. The water situation deserves extended attention because it illuminates something fundamental about what survival on Katakan actually requires. And on most worlds, even hostile ones, rivers and lakes represent a resource. They provide the most basic biological necessity, and accessing them is among the first priorities of any survival situation. On Katakan, water sources are among the most dangerous places on the planet. The rivers and swamps and pools that the jungle produces in abundance are contaminated with organisms, not just bacteria and protozoa of the kind standard filtration can remove, but complex multicellular organisms. Some of them specialized parasites, some of them general predators, small enough to enter the body through water intake, but large enough to cause significant damage once inside. Drinking unfiltered Katakan water is suicide, but the filtration technology required to make it safe is equipment that must be maintained, that requires power, that has components that break and need replacement. And that represents one of the critical dependencies of every settlement on the supply ships that arrive from off-world. The soil is contaminated with necrotic bacteria that live in such concentrations that even a small open wound, a scratch from a thorn, a blister from ill-fitting boots, a cut from the knife you were using to clear vegetation, becomes a potential entry point for a swift and unpleasant infection. Katakans treat every wound immediately, every time, without exception. Whilst not because they're medically paranoid, but because the ones who treated wounds immediately are the ones who are alive to have learned that lesson. This is the world before we've named a single specific creature or plant. The baseline, the air, the water, the ground, the climate, is already sufficient to classify Katakan as among the most challenging environments for human habitation anywhere in the galaxy. And then you add the biology. At part 4. The flora. When the plants are the apex predators. On most worlds, plants are passive. They grow toward light. They pull nutrients from the soil. They reproduce through flowers and seeds and the patient work of pollinators. They might be toxic if consumed. They might have thorns or irritating compounds as defenses against grazers. But they are fundamentally stationary, reactive entities that exist within food chains without being active participants in the hunting side of it. You walk past a tree on most worlds, and the tree does not respond. It does not notice you. It has no mechanism for noticing you, because noticing you would not benefit it. On Katakan, that assumption will kill you. Let's begin with the barbed venom gorse, one of the most famous plants in the 40k setting, and for good reason. To call it a plant is technically accurate, but catastrophically inadequate. The venom gorse is a carnivorous organism possessed of what multiple sources describe specifically as a primal, cunning sapience. Not intelligence in any human sense, but a biological drive toward hunting that has, over millions of years of evolutionary pressure, produced something that functions in ways that are operationally indistinguishable from tactical thinking. The venom gorse doesn't sit and wait for prey to stumble into it. It moves toward prey. And it has the ability to extend new growth in the direction of heat signatures, which means in the direction of living animals. And it does this deliberately. It generates new weapon growths and toxins throughout its life cycle, adapting its chemical arsenal to whatever it encounters. When it encounters a human presence, the venom gorse responds. Of the toxins it produces, cause debilitating neurological effects. The sources note that the neurotoxins are injected with barbs that enter the bloodstream and begin interfering with nerve signal transmission almost immediately, causing progressive loss of motor control that works from the extremities inward. The outcome of a meaningful venom gorse injection without immediate treatment is invariably fatal. What makes the venom gorse particularly terrifying is not just its capability, but its patience. It will extend its growth toward a target slowly, over minutes, positioning itself while the target is unaware, and then strike with the rapid, committed movement of something that has been planning this for longer than the target has been standing there. A round, dead venom gorse, where its victims have been consumed and the remains have been left, you will find what sources describe consistently as a collection of dead animal bones, alien skeletons, and the desiccated remains of human beings who got too close and didn't recognize the threat in time. The venom gorse is patient. It does not need to rush. The jungle has taught it, through 10 million years of evolution, that patience is more efficient than speed when your prey doesn't know you're there. The grappleweed is the venom gorse's more aggressive relative, and if anything, it dispenses with even the pretense of patience. Where the venom gorse extends and waits, the grappleweed barrels toward prey, with the kind of committed velocity that you would associate with an animal, not a plant. It generates digestive acids as it moves, and spraying them in front of itself to create a slurry of partially dissolved ground cover that impedes the movement of whatever it's pursuing. Then it extends barbed, adhesive tentacles that wrap around the target with grip strength that only specialized cutting tools can overcome, dragging the prey toward a fleshy central structure. The sources describe it as a trumpet-shaped organ where digestion occurs. The digestive process, it should be noted, does not require the prey to be dead before it begins. The grappleweed starts eating when it catches something. Whether that something is still alive is not a variable the grappleweed has been designed to care about. The brainleaf is, in some ways, the most deeply unsettling plant on Katakan, because its horror operates at a level that bypasses all the straightforward physical mechanisms of killing and instead touches something more existential. The brainleaf is a small tree. To look at it in the jungle, it is indistinguishable from dozens of other small trees growing in the same vicinity. Nothing about it advertises the danger it represents. There are no obvious barbs, no bright warning coloration, no smell of toxins, no movement to catch the eye. It is, to all external observation, completely ordinary. The brainleaf's tendrils are extraordinarily fine, hair-like structures capable of penetrating clothing, slipping through gaps in protective equipment, and finding the junction between a collar and a neck, or the space between a boot top and a trouser leg, or any of the dozens of small gaps that exist in any practical outfit a human being might wear into a jungle. When the tendrils make contact with skin, they work their way into the tissue with the patient persistence of plant root systems, following nerve pathways toward the spine. Once they reach the spinal cord and establish a biological interface, the brainleaf begins producing compounds that override the host's nervous system. The host does not lose consciousness. They continue to walk, to breathe, to move through the world. But the decisions are no longer theirs. The brainleaf's biological drives are simple: seek resources, spread. A brainleaf-controlled human will walk into areas they would never otherwise enter, carrying the brainleaf's reproductive apparatus to places it couldn't reach on its own. Eventually the host dies, either from the physical effects of the infection or from being directed into situations that kill them, and at that point, the brainleaf has finished with them. What makes this particularly relevant to Katashan community life is the detection problem. A person under brainleaf control looks, behaves, and speaks like a person. The control is subtle. Other community members may not notice until the infection has had time to progress to a stage that is beyond treatment. Yet the Katashans have developed screening practices, certain behavioral tests, physical examinations, ways of watching how someone moves when they think no one is looking, but none of them are perfectly reliable. Multiple sources note that the brainleaf may be an evolutionary offshoot of a tyrannid organism called the cortex leech, which has nearly identical capabilities. The implications of that connection we will examine in detail in a later section. For now, I simply register the existence of a plant on Catachan that can take over a human being from the inside and walk that human being to their death without them being able to stop it. The Catachan mantrap takes a concept that exists on more forgiving worlds. The carnivorous plant that waits for insects to fall into its trap and escalates it to Catachan scale. A standard carnivorous trap plant is stationary, passive, and requires the prey to come to it. The Catachan mantrap is mobile, as its leaves extend and actively sweep through the surrounding area, searching for warm bodies with the slow, methodical sweep of something that has evolved to do exactly this and has done it for a very long time. When its leaves detect the heat signature and pressure of a suitable target, they clamp shut with force, capable of causing serious structural damage to whatever they catch, and they do not let go. The stranglevine prefers shade, which in a jungle where shade is everywhere, means the stranglevine is everywhere. Its tube-like trunks are difficult to distinguish from the dozens of other tube-like growths that constitute the visual texture of a Catachan jungle. When the stranglevine detects the vibration created by something moving nearby, its detection mechanism operates through the sensitivity of its root systems to ground vibration. An elegant solution to the problem of targeting mobile prey, it extends long, yet highly adhesive stamen that coil around whatever created the vibration. The adhesion is not immediately painful, and the coiling itself is not violent enough to be immediately obvious. The prey may not realize they're caught until they try to move away and discover they cannot. The stranglevine then simply holds on. It does not need to kill quickly. It waits. Dehydration, which is not a comfortable process, usually takes between 1 and 2 days in the heat of Catachan. The breathweed operates through an ingestion vector rather than a contact one, which makes it difficult to avoid even with careful physical precaution. Its spores are airborne, and they are sized to lodge in the mucous membranes of the upper respiratory tract. Once established, the spores germinate, and the resulting growth attaches itself specifically to the tissue of the host's tongue, which provides a warm, moist, nutrient-rich environment for the early stages of development. Over the following days, the breathweed consumes the tongue tissue it has colonized, replacing it with its own growth. The host tongue is gone. In its place is a breathweed structure that serves as both the plant's feeding apparatus and its eventual spore release mechanism. When the plant matures, the host dies, and death releases a cloud of spores into the environment to continue the cycle. And Catachans who encounter breathweed early, who notice the characteristic early symptoms before the infection progresses beyond treatment, can have it removed surgically, which is an unpleasant procedure but survivable. Those who miss the early window, or who don't have access to a medic capable of performing the removal, do not survive. We should mention the Kanak floater as a moment of relative relief in this catalogue of horrors, or because it is one of the only native organisms on Catachan that is not actively hostile to human life. The Kanak floater is filled with lighter-than-air gases and drifts through the upper canopy like a biological balloon, using sensitive feeler tendrils to detect sources of warmth and moisture, primarily water sources, which it needs to release its seeds. Human beings also register as warmth and moisture sources, which means the floaters periodically drift toward people and then explode their seed pods in the general vicinity of whoever triggered the detection. The pods themselves are not toxic. The explosion is startling but not dangerous, at least by Catachan standards. Catachans refer to the floater with something approaching affection, which on Catachan means they find it amusing rather than immediately lethal. And then there are the shardrak spines, formations of crystallized, fossilized organic material that emerge from the ground in walls and clusters like broken glass, made of something that used to be alive. They are not plants in the traditional sense, and they are not quite mineral formations either, sitting somewhere in the uncomfortable category of geological-biological hybrid that Catachan seems to favor.
Actually, before I keep going, I just want to say Catachan is genuinely one of my favorite corners of the whole 40k setting, And I know that sounds a bit odd given everything I've just been describing. Like, the planet is actively trying to murder you every second of every day. But that's kind of exactly why I love it. Because in a universe that is almost entirely built around enormous armies and godlike beings, Katashan is just people. Stubborn, ridiculous, terrifyingly capable people who looked at the worst place in the known galaxy and decided to call it home. There's something about that I find genuinely moving. It reminds me of why I got into 40k in the first place. Not the big battles, but the quiet human stories hiding underneath all of it. But anyways, that's enough of me going off script. Let's keep going.
They are sharp enough to penetrate standard issue Imperial Guard armor, as they grow in patterns that create natural corridors and dead ends in the jungle, which has the effect of channeling movement through the jungle in ways that benefit every ambush predator using the terrain. Every plant is poisonous. We need to return to that foundational statement periodically because it has implications that extend beyond the obvious. It means that foraging is impossible on Katakhan, in any survival situation on any other world. One of the fundamental skills is the ability to identify edible plants and fungi for emergency food. On Katakhan, there are no edible plants, not one. Every potential food source that the environment appears to offer is actually a delivery mechanism for something that will kill you. This is why the Katashans are entirely dependent on food supplies shipped from off-world. You cannot live off the land on Katakhan. The land is not a resource. The land is the enemy. Part 5. The fauna. Every creature in every nightmare you've ever had. If the plants represent the slow, patient, methodical kind of danger, the danger of a world that is continuously and quietly working to consume you, then the animals of Katakhan represent the immediate, acute, loud kind. The kind where something with a great many legs and a set of jaws that could encompass a military transport suddenly emerges from undergrowth that definitely was not moving a moment ago, and your entire sensory experience condenses to the single sharp point of this present moment and what you are going to do about the next 3 seconds. Every animal on Katakhan is carnivorous. Again, as with the plants, every, not most, not the majority, not even a significant majority. Every documented animal species on Katakhan feeds on other animals. The ecosystem has no herbivores. It has no gentle grazers, no passive filter feeders, and no niches occupied by organisms that process plant material and convert it into protein for something else to eat. The entire food web of Katakhan is built on layers of predation. Every creature on the planet is a predator of something, and most of them, given sufficient motivation, opportunity, or simple proximity, are predators of humans. The Katakhan devil is where we must begin, because it is the creature that defines Katakhan's predatory reputation more completely than any other single organism, classified with a certain grim scientific humor as Katakhanus scorpiones maximus. The Katakhan devil is an insectoid predator that represents what Katakhan's evolutionary process produces when it is allowed to work unchecked for millions of years at the top of a food chain, something essentially perfect at what it does, which is killing things much larger than itself with ruthless efficiency. The basic body plan of the Katakhan devil is scorpion-like, a segmented body, multiple pairs of legs, a long tail bearing a poisonous barb that curves forward over the creature's back. That description suggests something manageable, a large scorpion, perhaps the size of a dog or a small vehicle, unpleasant certainly, but in a category of threat that organized armed humans can deal with. And this impression lasts only until you learn what the creature actually grows to. As Katakhan devils grow, and they grow throughout their lives, adding new body segments, they develop more sections and more legs. A young Katakhan devil, a devil spawn, might be several meters long, dangerous, fast, capable of killing an individual human, but manageable for a well-armed group. A fully grown adult Katakhan devil can be 30 meters in length, with up to 30 sets of legs, representing the size of a small land train. Not a vehicle comparable to a land train in abstract terms, comparable in actual physical scale. The body of a full-grown Katakan devil is 30 meters of segmented chitin and muscle and poison, moving through the jungle with a fluid, multi-legged efficiency that lets something of that bulk move faster than it has any right to. Or on the older males, the ones that have survived long enough to grow truly enormous, develop their front legs into massive claw-like structures that the locals call fiddlers, after the way the enlarged claws move. Fiddlers are the apex predators on a world of apex predators. They represent a threat level that requires organized military response to address. The Katachans have standing protocols for devil encounters, as including specific weapons loadouts and tactical formations that have been refined over generations of encounters with creatures that destroy those formations and require the survivors to develop improved ones. The Katakan devil is also social. This is perhaps the detail that makes them most threatening in a strategic sense. They form nesting groups that contain several large adults and dozens of devil spawn. These groups are territorial and will collectively defend their nesting area against any intrusion. Human settlements that establish themselves in Katachan devil territory are not dealing with individual animals. They are dealing with coordinated family groups of armored insectoids in the 30-meter size range with poison barbs and enough collective intelligence to adapt their approach based on what has failed against this particular settlement before. Or documented cases of Katakan devil attacks on Imperial Guard tank companies exist in the records. The tanks frequently lost multiple vehicles. The fact that Imperial tank companies, collections of heavy armor that can engage enemy fortifications and destroy light spacecraft, represent a meaningful challenge for these creatures, tells you something about the scale of what the Katachans live alongside. There is a rite of passage in Katachan culture. The killing of a Katachan devil, as by hand or with small arms, as a demonstration of warrior capability, not by calling in an artillery strike, not by organizing a large armed group, by finding one and killing it yourself, or with minimal assistance. Consider what that says about the baseline expectations placed on the people who live on this world. The Great Barking Toad, classified formally as Catacanus bufo moribundus, as the name communicating an alarming amount of information, occupies a unique category among Katakan's fauna. Not the largest, not the most aggressive, not the most physically dangerous in any direct confrontation. But the Great Barking Toad holds the distinction, documented and repeatedly confirmed, of being the most toxic creature ever recorded anywhere in the known galaxy. The most toxic in the entire galaxy. That is the creature that lives on this planet, looking like a frog. Whereas the mechanism of the Great Barking Toad's lethality is detonation. When startled by anything it perceives as threatening, a sound, a vibration, a sudden movement, the activation of powered equipment nearby. The barking toad explodes. Its body undergoes a rapid, catastrophic release of the toxin compounds it produces and stores internally, creating a cloud of poison that expands outward in all directions to a radius of up to 1 kilometer from the toad's former location. Yet the toad itself dies in this detonation. Everything else within that kilometer radius also dies. And when the sources say everything, they mean without meaningful exception. The toxin produced by the Great Barking Toad penetrates sealed environmental suits. It penetrates respirators designed to filter industrial chemical environments. It penetrates power armor, the same power armor that Space Marines wear. The articulated ceramite and adamantium shells that can absorb bolter rounds and chainsword strikes, and the kinetic energy of vehicle collisions. Power armor, which is among the most protective personal equipment the Imperium has ever developed, does not stop the Barking Toad's toxin cloud. The toxin finds the joins, the filters, the exhaust vents, the microscopic gaps that exist in any physical barrier, because nothing can be perfectly sealed, while also allowing its wearer to function. And every biological organism within the cloud is reduced. The sources use this specific word, reduced, to a formless and slimy mass. Not killed and left intact, dissolved. The organic material that was recently a living creature is converted into a biological slurry, and nothing will grow in the area affected by the cloud afterward. The toxin sterilizes the soil. Whatever biological processes the barking toad's weapon chemistry involves, it is so thoroughgoing that it disrupts the biochemistry of the very earth, leaving a zone of ecological silence that persists for years. Games Workshop, it is worth noting, has never produced tabletop game rules for the great barking toad. The stated reason is that the creature is so lethal that the first time any weapon was fired or powered equipment was activated within detection range of 1, the game would be over. This is an in-universe joke that happens to capture a genuine truth. The barking toad is a walking, or rather hopping, extinction event for anything within a kilometer of it, if it is sufficiently startled. The Catachans, who share their world with these creatures, have developed extraordinary habits of stillness and quietness in the jungle, and an instinctive read of the terrain that lets experienced scouts identify areas where barking toads are likely to be resting, giving those areas a wide and respectful berth. There is also a lesser barking toad, which detonates in a 5-meter radius rather than a kilometer, considerably more manageable, still absolutely lethal to everyone within 5 meters. The Catacan face-eater is among the most viscerally horrifying of Catacan's predators, not because of its size or the scale of its threat. It is physically one of the smaller dangerous organisms on the planet, but because of its methodology. At rest, the face-eater resembles a flat, cloth-like organism, similar in shape to a piece of fabric or a towel, hanging from branches near water sources and known animal paths, entirely indistinct from the dozens of other flat organic things that drape across branches in a jungle. This resemblance is not coincidental. The face-eater is difficult to identify specifically because of how much it looks like something else. When prey comes within range, the face-eater drops directly onto the face of its target, or uses powerful adhesive-lined muscle tissue to launch itself horizontally to reach something it cannot drop onto from above. Once attached, it wraps around the head with a grip that only specialized cutting tools can separate in time to matter. The creature simultaneously blocks the airways, causing suffocation, while releasing powerful digestive acids that begin consuming the face, starting with soft tissue and working inward. The creature feeds as its prey dies. When the prey is dead, the face-eater deposits eggs in the body, which hatch into larvae that consume the remaining organic material. The organism is extraordinarily efficient. Nothing is wasted. The brain leaf's animal equivalent in terms of invisible, insidious horror is the vein worm. Where the brain leaf controls through neurological override, the vein worm kills through a particularly elegant, if elegant can be applied to something so horrifying, form of stealth parasitism. The vein worm's bite delivers an anesthetic compound that prevents the victim from feeling the bite site at all. This is not a kindness. The anesthetic is how the vein worm ensures that its next action goes undetected. It burrows through the numbed skin, into the tissue beneath, and toward the circulatory system. Once in the bloodstream, the vein worm deposits eggs throughout the body, carried by the blood to wherever the current takes them. When the eggs hatch, the larvae begin consuming the host from inside. They work methodically through accessible tissues, brain, heart, bone, following warmth and blood flow. There is no known treatment once the vein worms have reached the bloodstream. The process takes days. Victims are aware for the majority of it. And the blood wasps coordinate in swarms that can number in the millions of individuals, each one small, each one delivering a venomous sting that is individually survivable but collectively overwhelming. A swarm of blood wasps can strip a human body to bare bone in under 1 hour. The venom they carry causes tissue dissolution that accelerates the process. What remains after a blood wasp swarm attack is an anatomical display rather than a body. A clean in the way that things that have been thoroughly consumed are clean. The heretic ants. And the name, again, telling you everything you need to know about the Catacan sense of humor, are named for their tendency to attack the soles of their prey's feet first. 1 bite produces enough venom to incapacitate an adult human for a month. 2 bites give roughly 1 day before systemic failure. 3 bites kill outright, on quickly enough that there is no time for any treatment that exists in Katakan's medical arsenal. They are small enough to fit through the ventilation holes in standard issue boots. Katakan boots are custom designed to prevent this, featuring specialized sealed construction that covers the base. A design detail that, like everything about Katakan equipment, exists because someone died discovering the need for it. But the drakebats inhabit the upper canopy, Ogren-sized winged pseudo-reptiles that wait motionlessly among the highest branches and descend without warning onto whatever passes below them. They drop from heights that give them momentum enough to stun a human instantly on impact, and their grip, taloned forelimbs designed specifically for restraining struggling prey, is essentially impossible to break without tools. They carry their prey back up into the canopy to feed at leisure, which means that by the time anyone realizes what has happened, there is nothing to be done. The shambling mamorphs from the volcanic regions of Katakan are massive creatures of muscle and matted hair, equipped with tusks that sources describe as capable of disemboweling an ogrin. Ogrin are large abhuman combat specialists, bred for physical resilience. They are not easy to eviscerate. The mamorphs are tough enough to challenge a Katakan devil in direct combat, which places them at the absolute apex of any threat hierarchy. The Katakans use mamorph tusks to make knives, which requires, as a precondition, killing the mamorph. This should tell you something about how seriously the Katakans take the concept of proving themselves. The venomous serpents, the flying swamp mamba, the coiling death cobra, the Katakan black viper, the giant blackback viper, are what you would expect in a place where every organism has been calibrated to maximum lethality over millions of years of evolutionary arms race. Some kill an adult human in under 30 heartbeats. Not 30 minutes, 30 heartbeats. The biology of venom delivery and action on Katakan operates at speeds that leave almost no window for treatment, even when the bite is detected immediately. Part 6. The settlements. What holding the line looks like. Given everything described above, the existence of human settlements on Katakan at all is genuinely remarkable in a way that is difficult to properly communicate. Not impressive in the way that building a city is impressive, with its engineering and logistics. Impressive in the way that refusing to be exterminated is impressive, and sustained through multiple generations against a world that has never once stopped trying to accomplish exactly that. The physical structure of a Katakan settlement is determined entirely by the requirements of survival against the ecosystem we've just described. Settlements are fortress structures, not in a romanticized medieval sense, but in the practical military sense of fortified positions designed to defend against specific, known threats that will attempt to breach the perimeter every night and in varying forms throughout the day. The walls are thick. The construction materials are chosen for resistance to the chemical attacks of the jungle's flora. The sightlines from the settlement's defenses are cleared and maintained across what the sources describe as vast plains surrounding the settlement, laboriously stripped of all vegetation to provide firing positions and deny the jungle a close approach. While that clearing is not a one-time construction project, it is an ongoing daily military operation. The jungle grows back, not slowly, the way vegetation might reclaim abandoned urban spaces on a temperate world over decades of patient regrowth. On Katakan, the rate of biological growth is extreme. Cut vegetation regrows rapidly in the perpetual heat and moisture, and the jungle does not simply grow back passively, it grows back directed, orienting new growth toward the settlement in ways that suggest the response we described earlier. The cleared zone requires active maintenance, not weekly, but daily. Miss a day, and the edges are already coming back. Miss a week, and you have a serious tactical problem. Miss a month, and the jungle has reclaimed enough of the buffer zone that the settlement's defenses are compromised. This daily clearing operation consumes a significant portion of every settlement's able-bodied population. As it is dangerous work, going near the jungle's edge to cut back growth means going near every creature and plant that inhabits the jungle's edge, and it must be done continuously, without exception. The people who do this work are not maintenance workers in any conventional sense. they are frontline fighters who happen to be clearing vegetation today. Tomorrow, they might be on watch. The day after, they might be responding to a creature incursion at the eastern wall. The roles blur because everyone in a Katakhan settlement fills every role as necessary. Building materials on Katakhan presents specific challenges that outsiders wouldn't immediately consider. Stone, which is geologically plentiful, is the primary structural material, but Katakhan's chemistry attacks it. The acids produced by various plant species seep into mortar over months and begin breaking it down. Our root systems, particularly the stranglevine's root systems, can fracture stone walls given sufficient time, exploiting microscopic gaps with the patient persistence of organisms that experience time differently than their adversaries. Lichen and fungal growth colonize every external surface, and Katakhan lichen is not benign. It produces compounds that accelerate the breakdown of whatever it grows on, as converting stone structures into porous material that then admits water and more organic growth, creating a progressive deterioration that requires constant counter-maintenance. The result is that every building in every Katakhan settlement is perpetually under repair, not undergoing improvement or expansion, constantly being repaired against the physical deterioration that the jungle imposes on it. This creates a particular relationship between the Katakhans and their structures. Nothing is precious, nothing is expected to be permanent, nothing is mourned over much when it falls, because everything was always going to fall eventually. What matters is what you build after. The population of any given settlement is small by the standards of the broader Imperium. Total planetary population is estimated in the range of 500,000 people, distributed across multiple settlements. On a planet-sized landmass, this is an extraordinarily low population density, the kind of density you would associate with a very sparsely settled frontier, or a world with specific limitations on habitation. Both apply to Katakhan. The attrition rate is the primary limiting factor. You cannot build large populations quickly when 75% of every generation doesn't reach adolescence. Supply ships from the Imperium bring food, medicine, weapons and ammunition, building materials, untechnical equipment. These ships are the lifeline on which every settlement depends, because Katakhan produces nothing that the settlements can eat. Remember, every plant is poisonous, and the settlement's industrial capability is minimal, focused almost entirely on maintenance and defense rather than production. In exchange for the supplies, Katakhan sends its most valuable resource, its people, but that is a later part of the story. Inside the walls, there is more than pure survival mechanics. There is daily life in the full human sense. Children are raised, food, imported, carefully stored, is prepared and shared. People argue and reconcile, fall in love, tell stories, sing songs, develop preferences and opinions, and the thousand small details that constitute an actual human existence, rather than just a biological one. Culture on Katakhan is intensely communal, not out of philosophical preference, but out of practical necessity. You cannot survive on Katakhan alone. Every person in a settlement is a necessary piece of the whole. Everyone's skills matter. Everyone's survival matters. The loss of any individual is felt as a practical reduction in the community's collective capacity, which means community bonds on Katakhan are forged at a depth and with a permanence that most of the wider Imperium can't replicate. Let's think about what a typical day inside one of these settlements actually looks like. Because the routine of daily survival on Katakhan is worth dwelling on in detail. It's easy to absorb the statistics and the bestiary and the descriptions of the jungle and come away with a mental image of the Katakhans as people permanently in crisis, perpetually teetering on the edge of extinction. That's not quite right. Crisis implies a deviation from normal conditions. On Katakhan, what we're describing is the normal conditions. Yet the Katakhans manage these conditions with the same calm professionalism that any well-trained professional applies to a demanding but familiar job. They have been doing this for 10,000 years. They are, at this point, very good at it. Dawn on Katakhan comes not as a clear sunrise, but as a gradual brightening of the green filtered light that is all the jungle canopy allows to reach the settlement's interior. The watch change happens at first light, the night watch, which is the most demanding rotation because Katakan's fauna is heavily active in darkness, hands over to the day watch. Night watch on Katakan means spending hours alert at a fixed position, listening to a jungle that is full of sound, rustling, clicking, the occasional crash of something large moving through undergrowth, the sounds that every experienced Katakan knows how to read, and the sounds that require immediate response. A good night watch soldier can tell from the character of the jungle's sounds whether a predator is approaching the settlement, whether a large devil is marking territory nearby, whether a swarm of blood wasps is moving through the middle canopy in a direction that might bring them toward the walls. A bad night watch soldier is one of the statistics. The morning clearing rotation begins immediately after the watch change. Armed groups, is typically organized in fire teams of 3 to 5 experienced fighters, move out along the perimeter to assess and address whatever the night's growth has produced. Vines that have extended toward the wall since yesterday's clearing are cut back. Any new plant growth in the cleared zone is removed. Any evidence of predator presence in the cleared zone, tracks, spoor, the remains of something that was hunted near the perimeter, is noted and assessed. If there are signs that something large has established a presence near the settlement, that becomes the priority response for the morning. Maintenance of the walls, as we've discussed, is continuous. There is always a crew working on some section of the settlement's outer structure, repointing mortar, reinforcing sections where root systems have applied pressure, replacing stone that has deteriorated beyond serviceability. The people who do this work are experienced fighters, not construction workers. They're armed while they work, and they work with one eye on the job and one on the jungle, because the wall maintenance rotation is a predictable schedule, and anything intelligent enough to hunt based on predictability will eventually notice it. Medical care consumes significant time and resources in every settlement. This is not emergency medicine responding to occasional crises. This is ongoing. It is systemic management of a population that is continuously sustaining low-level exposure to toxins, pathogens, and parasitic organisms. Every morning, the settlement's healers, people trained in the specific medical knowledge Katakan's conditions require, knowledge that includes treatment protocols for injuries and infections that exist nowhere else in the Imperium's standard medical literature. See patients dealing with the night's accumulation, foot rot checks, wound assessments, early-stage breathweed examinations, blood samples tested for veinworm infection in anyone who reported unusual numbness or tingling. The medical operation in a Katakan settlement is more like a combat field hospital than a clinic, constantly busy, dealing with conditions that would be rare emergencies elsewhere, treating things that would be fatal in less experienced hands with practiced efficiency. Training happens every day for everyone capable of participating. It's not because the Katakans are a militarized society in the formal sense, but because on Katakan, not training means your skills degrade, and degraded skills mean death. The training is practical, weapons maintenance and qualification, tactical exercises that mimic the specific threat types the settlement faces, first aid training including the specific treatments for Katakan's unique hazards, and the kind of environmental education that teaches people to read the jungle's signs. Our experienced warriors mentor younger ones. Children who are old enough watch the training and participate in age-appropriate versions of it. Knowledge is passed down through demonstration and practice, rather than through formal instruction. Because formal instruction is inefficient, and the consequences of not knowing something are too immediate to allow inefficiency. Evenings in a Katakan settlement are quieter than the days, though quieter means something relative to the earlier hours rather than actually quiet. The lights inside the walls burn at a specific intensity, calibrated to the deterrence requirements of the settlement's location, bright enough to keep away most of the fauna that avoids firelight, but not so bright that it creates visibility issues for the watch. Families gather. Food is prepared from the imported stocks with whatever recipes have been developed for making the available ingredients palatable. Stories are told, many of them practical. The kind of stories that teach specific knowledge about the jungle, while also being narratively engaging enough to hold the attention of the children who most need to absorb the information. The stories of Catachan are survival manuals dressed in narrative clothes. And the best storytellers on Catachan are also among the best jungle fighters, because the two skills draw on the same deep understanding of the environment. Sleep on Catachan, even inside the walls, is never fully relaxed in the way sleep is elsewhere. The night watch is always present, but everyone knows the limits of what the watch can catch. Every experienced Catachan sleeps with weapons in reach. Many of them, even decades into life inside a settlement, must retain the habit of sleeping lightly enough to wake at sounds that most people would filter out as background noise. This is not anxiety. It is a physical adaptation to an environment that has killed people who slept too deeply, and it is as natural to a Catachan as the light sleep of a parent with a young child is natural to parents. The cycle repeats. Every day, another day. Every morning, another check of the perimeter, another maintenance rotation, another training session, another set of medical assessments, another batch of stories passed down, another night on watch, listening to the jungle and reading what it says. It is, in its way, a profoundly ordered life, not comfortable, not easy, not ever free from the weight of danger, but ordered, purposeful, and shared. These are communities of people who know exactly what they are doing and why, who have a place in a system that works and that they understand completely, and who find meaning in that clarity in the same way that people everywhere find meaning in doing necessary things well, surrounded by others who are doing the same. It is only from outside, from the safe, processed, managed distance of worlds where the greatest danger is the political machinations of a hive city spire, that Catachan looks like a curse. From inside, it looks like home. Shao Part 7. Childhood on Catachan, the mathematics of survival. The statistics are stark enough to repeat slowly, because they need time to settle into comprehension. 50% of all children born on Catachan do not survive infancy. Half. Before a child on Catachan has had the opportunity to do anything, to learn anything, to become anyone, there is a coin flip probability that the planet will have already claimed them. And of the half that survive infancy, as only half of those reach the age of 10 standard years, which means that of every 100 children born on Catachan, 25 survived their adolescence. 1 in 4. 3/4 of every generation gone before they've had the chance to become who they might have been. Think, for a moment, about what that means for the experience of being a parent on Catachan. The knowledge you carry into every pregnancy, into every birth, and into every early morning, when you're watching a small child sleep and listening to the jungle beyond the walls, making its sounds, that this child has a 50% chance of not being there in a year. And if they make it a year, they have a 50% chance of not making it to 10. The loss is not exceptional on Catachan. It is not a tragedy that falls on some unlucky families while others are spared. It is the statistical reality of every family, every time. But the grief is not something that can be hidden or processed in private, because it is too universal and too frequent. It is absorbed into the culture, metabolized into something that appears from the outside like stoicism, but is from the inside something more carefully calibrated. A profound and bone-level understanding that life is finite and precious and worth fighting for, precisely because the fighting for it is the mechanism by which survival happens at all. Catachan children who survive their first year are not average children in any developmental sense. The selection pressure begins immediately at birth. This is evolution operating on a timescale compressed by the ferocity of Catachan's environment, and the children who survive the first year are already, in some measurable biological sense, different from children born into more forgiving environments, that their immune systems have been tested and refined by continuous exposure to pathogen loads that would hospitalize adults elsewhere. Their physiology begins reflecting the heightened demands of the environment in ways that accumulate across generations, until you reach the present-day Katakans, who are physically superior to baseline humans in every measurable way. Taller, more muscular, with faster reflexes, superior immune response, and the kind of physical development that leads other Imperial Guard soldiers to call them baby Ogrins, and then usually to regret saying it within earshot. The education of a Katakan child is unlike any formal curriculum the Imperium's Skolum system would recognize. There are no schoolhouses on Katakan in the institutional sense, no buildings dedicated to teaching reading, mathematics, Imperial history, and the Creed as primary subjects. He's staffed by sanctioned teachers following standardized curricula. Education on Katachan is survival education, and it begins as early as the child can be made to understand anything at all. Children learn to shoot before they can walk. This is not hyperbole. The sources state it explicitly and mean it literally. Children on Katachan develop marksmanship skills as one of the first complex skill acquisitions of their lives. Yea, because the ability to place rounds accurately onto a target is more immediately life-critical than almost any other capability. A child who can shoot is a child who can contribute to the settlement's defense and eventually to their own defense. A child who cannot shoot is a child who depends entirely on others for their protection, and Katakan does not produce environments where that dependency can be sustained long-term. Thus, by the age at which a child on a more sheltered world might be learning to read simple words, a Katakan child is instead building the knowledge base required to identify which plants in their immediate environment are actively hunting versus passively dangerous, a distinction with immediate survival implications, which animal sounds indicate approach and from which direction, how to read the way vegetation moves to distinguish between wind-driven motion and something large passing through, and what specific behavioral signs indicate that a Katakan devil is using the territorial tracking behavior that precedes an attack. These are not abstract skills. They are the difference between being alive and not being alive, and Katakan children learn them the way children everywhere learn the things that survival in their particular environment requires. The children who reach the age of 10 on Katakan are, by that point, combatants in any practical operational sense. They have been hunting smaller game, participating in the clearing operations that protect the settlement's perimeter, and in many cases have already had direct encounters with predators large enough to kill adults, encounters they survived, because the ones who didn't survive are among the 75% we mentioned. The ones who are still alive at 10 have demonstrated, through the most rigorous and merciless selection process that any human society has ever imposed on its youngest members, that they carry what it takes. Not just physically. The psychological calibration that Katakan produces in its children is one of the most significant and least fully appreciated aspects of what the world does to its people. The constant presence of mortal danger, managed through skill and community, and the accumulated knowledge of generations rather than through institutional protection and safety systems, produces individuals with a particular relationship to risk and mortality that simply does not develop in populations that have never had to cultivate it. Katashans are not fearless. Fear, neurologically speaking, is a useful signal that something in the environment represents a threat, as in Katakans have the most refined threat detection systems of any human beings in the galaxy. What they lack is the paralytic response to fear that characterizes people who have never learned to function through it. A Katakan notices fear, assesses the information it provides, and acts on that information. They do not freeze. They do not panic. They have been managing fear since they were old enough to hold a weapon, and management of fear is, at this point, just another skill. And the adults that this process produces are, as the sources consistently note, among the hardiest, most capable, and most psychologically resilient human beings in the Imperium of man. They are not comfortable in the way that comfort is usually understood. They are competent. They are effective. And they carry within them the specific quiet confidence of people who have survived something that should have killed them, not once but every single day of their lives. on from the moment they took their first breath in a world that immediately began trying to end them. Part 8. The people, culture, identity, and the Katakan spirit. On most imperial worlds, society organizes itself around structures that the administratum has spent millennia refining and codifying: nobility, merchant classes, labor guilds, ecclesiastical hierarchies, military ranks tied to birth and social connection as much as to demonstrable skill. The systems are imperfect and often cruelly so, but they provide frameworks for social organization that persist across generations, regardless of the individual talents of those who occupy positions within them. You can be bad at being a noble. The position survives you. There is no aristocracy on Katakan, not because the Katakans have developed ideological objections to hierarchy. They are not philosophers in the political sense, but because Katakan doesn't allow aristocrats to exist. But the jungle does not care about bloodline or connections or the accumulated social capital of your ancestors. It cares whether you can shoot straight, move quietly, recognize the smell of a venom gorse before you're within reach of it, and whether the person next to you can trust their life to your judgment when something comes out of the undergrowth at 3 in the morning. If you can do those things, you survive and you earn the respect of people whose respect is worth having. If you cannot do those things, the planet removes you from the gene pool in the geological equivalent of an eye blink. The social organization of Katakan settlements is tribal in character. Collections of people united by shared experience, shared danger, and the bonds forged by mutual survival rather than by blood relations, economic arrangements, or bureaucratic assignment. Leadership in Katakan society is earned rather than appointed, and it is maintained only through demonstrated competence. A Katakan officer who makes bad decisions does not survive their bad decisions in the way that officers elsewhere might survive them. Either the decision's consequences kill the officer directly, or their community, people who have the skills and the willingness to act on poor leadership, corrects the situation themselves. This is why Katakan regiments generally don't have commissars, or rather they tend to have commissars who are either remarkably skilled at earning genuine respect through genuine competence, or they have what the records describe as short and eventful careers. The Katakans are not insubordinate in the way that cowardly soldiers are insubordinate. They simply do not accept authority that hasn't been earned, because they've never lived in an environment where accepting unearned authority is compatible with staying alive. Or the knife is the center of Katakan material culture in a way that functions simultaneously as symbol and as practical necessity. And on Katakan, those two things are never fully separate. Every Katakan makes their own knife, not metaphorically, not with significant assistance from experienced craftspeople, by hand, using the skills taught to them and the materials available. The crafting of a personal blade connects the individual to the tradition of all the Katakans who have come before. But it is also a fundamental survival tool in an environment where every other piece of equipment might malfunction, run out of ammunition, or be too large and conspicuous for the tight, tangled, close-quarters spaces of the jungle. The Katakan Fang, the standard combat blade, approximately 20 inches of forged steel, is not just a weapon. It is a status symbol, a tool, a companion, and in some sense, an extension of the person who made and carries it. The knife's condition, its quality, the wear pattern on its edge, the way the maker has personalized the grip, these things communicate information about the person who carries it that Katakans read fluently and outsiders cannot. Larger variants exist for specific purposes. The Night Reaper, designed for absolute silence in close quarters elimination, is slim and balanced for a thrust that kills before a sound can be made. The Devil's Claw is a weapon that the sources acknowledge is more sword than knife, or carried by the most experienced fighters as both a practical tool and a declaration about who they are. Orcs, who understand and respect quality craftsmanship in their direct, enthusiastic way, covet Katakan knives specifically, and some orc leaders have made significant efforts to acquire them. The red bandana is the defining visual identifier of a Katakan warrior. the single garment that is universal across every regiment, every individual, every campaign posting. Every jungle fighter wears one. It represents the blood oath taken upon joining a regiment, the formal commitment to serve the Emperor, to fight for the Imperium, and to carry Katakhan's name through whatever the war demands. But the red bandana predates the regimental tradition. It is a cultural marker that existed in Katakhan settlements long before the Departamento Munitorum formalized it. It is a mark of identity and belonging, a signal to other Katakhans, and a reminder, subtle, constant, are worn against the skin, of blood both sworn and spilled in living on this world. Tattoos in Katakhan culture function as the equivalent of medals and campaign badges in other imperial regiments. The Katakhans do not particularly value the shiny formal recognition systems of other fighting organizations. They tend to regard medal ceremonies with something between amusement and mild contempt. What they value is recorded on the body itself. A skull marks 5 years of service. Or a dagger marks a decade. The skull and crosshairs denotes a marksman of particular distinction. These marks accumulate across a lifetime of service. They are permanent, indelible, carried into every engagement and every final resting place. They cannot be taken away. They cannot be delegated or inherited. They were earned specifically by the body that carries them in the specific battles that body survived, and they mean exactly what they say. But the earning of a Katakhan name is among the most culturally significant moments in a Katakhan's life. Every warrior eventually acquires a name, a sobriquet awarded by their community that acknowledges something specific about who they are and what they have done. Colonel Straken is Iron Hand, not because he was appointed to command the Iron Hand Regiment, but because a Myral land shark bit off his original arm and he killed the land shark in the same moment, and then replaced the arm with bionics and kept going. Sergeant Harker is Stonetooth, because his toughness is so notable that he once crushed a Tyrannid Ravener's neck between his biceps, and the rumor that he chews glass for relaxation is probably an exaggeration, but people believe it because it's consistent with everything else they know about him. These names are given by peers, recognized by the community, and carry a weight that no bureaucratic rank designation can replicate. They are recognition of who you actually are, given by people who have seen it firsthand. There is humor on Katakhan, dry humor, the kind that emerges specifically in communities where death is a daily companion, and the only productive relationship with mortality is to find it periodically funny. Katakhan humor tends toward the understated and the dark, the gap between how terrible something is and how calmly it's described. The names given to lethal organisms, heretic ants, are named for where they bite first, barking toad because of the sound it makes before it kills everything. The stories told about commissars who managed to go missing during routine jungle patrols. It is, in its way, both a coping mechanism and a philosophy. If you can make something funny, it has less power over you. And on Katakhan, if you can't find something funny about the thing trying to kill you, you're going to be in very poor spirits for a very short time. Ask the cheroots, low-leaf cigarettes, that Katakhan fighters are commonly depicted smoking are not a mere visual affectation. They are a cultural marker of the Katakhan aesthetic, the deliberate calm, the specific kind of unhurried confidence that comes from having normalized mortal danger to such a degree that nothing the galaxy can produce actually surprises you anymore. The person who can sit quietly, smoke a cheroot, and then discuss the tactical situation, while there are things in the jungle making sounds that would send soldiers from other regiments into combat panic. That person is, in the Katakhan cultural imagination, the ideal, not because they lack the capacity for urgency, but because they have learned that urgency without information is panic, and panic on Katakhan is how you die. Part 9. The Tithe, Becoming the Galaxy's Greatest Warriors. The arrangement between Katakhan and the Imperium of Man is elegant in its simplicity and has held for thousands of years with a consistency that the Imperium's sprawling, often dysfunctional bureaucracy rarely manages for anything. It works because both parties understand it perfectly. You give us your people, and we give you enough supplies to keep those people alive long enough to give us more people. As Katakhan has no mineral resources of strategic value, No ore deposits, no rare materials, nothing the Adeptus Mechanicus wants to mine. It has no agricultural output that can be shipped off-world. Since every plant is toxic to humans, and the animal protein, if you could safely harvest and preserve it, would represent a logistical challenge that the Munitorum would not find worthwhile. What Katakan has, its only export, its entire contribution to the Imperium's economy, so the complete basis of the relationship is its inhabitants, and its inhabitants, as we have established at considerable length, are extraordinary. Each year, Katahan sends dozens of regiments to the Departamento Munitorum, dozens of regiments, annually, from a total planetary population of roughly 500,000 people, on a world where 75% of all children don't survive to adolescence. The math, when you work it out, is brutal, and the Katachans know it, and they go anyway. Or not because they are coerced. The logistical reality of coercing Katakan is something the Munitorum has never seriously entertained, for obvious reasons relating to the kind of people who would need to be sent to do the coercing. They go because they understand themselves to be part of a larger struggle, and because serving in the Imperial Guard is, to a Katachan, not a sacrifice imposed from outside, but an expression of who they are. In exchange, the supply ships come. Medical supplies, food, or weapons and ammunition, building materials. Everything the settlements need that they cannot produce themselves arrives on those ships, and the arrangement has stood for millennia in a relationship of mutual dependency that functions with remarkable reliability. The Katachans need the supplies. The Imperium needs the Katachans. The jungle provides the training. Nobody needs to like the arrangement for it to work. Because the Katakan jungle fighters, who enter the broader service of the Imperial Guard, are something remarkable. Other regiments have reputations, veterans of long campaigns, soldiers from harsh worlds, specialist units with particular tactical niches. But the Katakan jungle fighters occupy a category that is specifically their own. Each one is assessed as equivalent in jungle fighting capability to 10 soldiers from any other regiment. Not better trained, though they are better trained. Or not more experienced, though they are more experienced. But fundamentally, constitutionally, all the way down to their biology and their psychology and their accumulated life experience. More capable of surviving and fighting in the hostile environments where jungle operations occur. They don't have commissars. This point deserves emphasis because it reveals something fundamental. As the Imperial Guard uses commissars as political officers and disciplinary enforcers, they have summary execution authority for cowardice or insubordination, and their presence is intended to ensure that units fight when they might otherwise break. In most regiments, commissars are respected and feared in roughly equal measure. In Katachan regiments, they are resented as an insult to people who have been fighting for their lives every day since birth and don't need external motivation to do what they've committed to do. Commissars assigned to Katachan regiments tend to either be very skilled at earning genuine respect through demonstrated competence, or they have short careers. Records of commissars going missing or dying in combat in Katachan units are numerous enough to constitute a statistical pattern. The Katachans do not need threatening to fight. They fight because they know exactly why fighting matters and have spent their entire lives developing the skills to do it well. What they will not tolerate is the implication that they might need threatening. Sly Marbo. The legend that has accumulated around this person is significant enough that separating verified record from embellishment has become genuinely difficult. And not because the verified record isn't extraordinary, but because people who know the verified record want to believe everything else is possible too. What is confirmed? Sly Marbo is a Katachan jungle fighter who operates effectively alone in situations where Imperial military doctrine would normally require units of specialists. On Farthest, he destroyed an armored Tau convoy by preparing an entire ravine with improvised explosives, alone over whatever time it took, operating without support. Jez on Sask's world, he captured an enemy command post single-handed and dealt with the commander and its bodyguards using nothing but his hands and what the sources describe as a ration tin. During the 13th Black Crusade, entire Chaos Space Marine encampments were found abandoned or destroyed, contents either dead from precision headshots or fled in evident panic, with no military force in the area. Investigation eventually established that Sly Marbo had been operating in the region alone. On Nordassa, Marbo destroyed a demonic Bannerlord-class Titan. The details of how are classified. He has been awarded the Star of Terror multiple times. The Star of Terror is the Imperial Guard's highest honor for valor. Most soldiers never receive it once. Marbo has received it multiple times, and several of the specific circumstances of its award are classified documents that only the highest levels of command have access to. Yet what Marbo represents as a cultural figure goes beyond his individual record, remarkable as that is. He is the outer limit of what Katakhan produces. He is proof that the extreme selection pressure, the extraordinary survival training, and the specific psychological calibration of a life lived on the most dangerous world in the galaxy can produce in a single individual. A capability set that operates beyond what the Imperium's most sophisticated military programs can replicate through conscious design. He is also, it should be noted, a mystery even to his own command. His origins on Katakhan, the specific tragedy that shaped him into what he became, these are known only to his original commanding officer, Colonel Troutman. Between missions, Troutman was the only consistent human contact Sly Marbo maintained. But he works alone on a level that goes beyond tactical preference. The jungle, and the solitude it demands, runs through him at a fundamental level. Part 10. When the galaxy came to Katakhan and lost. One of the most clarifying aspects of Katakhan's history is what happens when the rest of the galaxy decides to come to Katakhan, rather than the other way around. The Katakhans are famous for what they do when deployed elsewhere. Yeah, but what happens when something with galactic-scale military capability brings its war to their home? The pattern, across multiple documented incidents, is consistent. Things that come to Katakhan with the intention of conquering or destroying it do not achieve their intention. Sometimes, this is because of the Katakhans specifically. More often, it is because of both the Katakhans and the planet simultaneously are operating as what can only be described as a coordinated defense in which the human population and the hostile ecosystem function together in ways that outside forces find impossible to fully account for. In 972.M41, a Chaos Lord of the Night Lords called Ratathrax brought an invasion force to Katakhan. He was not naive. He understood the tactical situation. He recognized that Katakhan's jungle represented a natural defense system that would be devastating to conventional military operations. So he addressed it methodically. Vast orbital bombardments targeted at incinerating large sections of jungle, removing the terrain advantage. He bombed the settlement bastion networks systematically. He prepared the ground for his forces before committing them to the surface. On paper, this was sound tactical thinking. Then he made planetfall to survey his handiwork. And Colonel Ironhand Straken, who had spent however long was necessary lying motionless in a quagmire of toxic sludge at the jungle's edge, waited until Ratathrax removed his helmet to get a better look at the devastation he had created, and ambushed him and throttled him to death with a poisonous barb root pulled from the mud. The Chaos Lord, who had brought orbital bombardment to suppress Katakhan's natural defenses, was personally killed in close-quarters combat by a man who had been using those natural defenses to wait for exactly this moment. During the 13th Black Crusade, the planet was cut off from communication with the broader Imperium by the warp storm Bass Infernia, which disrupted astropathic signals. Katakhan received no warning of multiple simultaneous threats. A wounded void whale, a creature of space, immense beyond the scale of normal animal description, was moving through the system, and an orc warband led by the notorious freebooter Captain Badrock launched a surface assault. Both threats arrived without warning, without any opportunity for preparation or reinforcement. Katakhan dealt with both of them. The orc assault, led by a warlord with a considerable reputation for tactical brutality, made no meaningful headway against a planet that actively fights back. The Void Whale encountered something in the Katakan system that turned it elsewhere. The specifics are not fully documented because there was no one keeping records from the outside at the time. The Era Indomitus event is the one that most clearly illustrates what Katakan actually is. Or after the fall of Cadia and the formation of the Great Rift, that galaxy-spanning warp tear that triggered cascading demonic incursions across hundreds of worlds simultaneously, Katakan was caught in the malignant energies of the rift. This is not a metaphorical proximity. The planet was engulfed in the spatial distortion of a warp rift and subjected to a full-scale demonic invasion. Demons of chaos, entities of the immaterial, immune to conventional fear, sustained by warp energies, was capable of manifesting weapons and capabilities that match most military hardware, poured onto Katakan's surface. When Reboot Guilliman's Indomitus Crusade eventually reached Katakan to relieve the siege, the Space Marines arrived to find relief was not required. The Katakan regiments had dealt with the demonic invasion themselves. The planet had dealt with the demonic invasion. The mechanism by which Katakan's ecosystem eliminates demonic entities is something that should not be possible by any standard theological or physical understanding of how chaos entities work. Demons that are destroyed in real space are supposed to return to the warp and reconstitute, because they are warp entities merely projected into physical reality. On Katakan, the records suggest this didn't happen. The jungle apparently consumed the demons without returning them to the warp, neutralizing them in a way that bypasses the mechanism that normally makes demons effectively unkillable, except through specific circumstances. Whether this is because Katakan's biological systems interact with the metaphysical in ways that no current Imperial science can explain, or whether the accounts are simply inaccurate, remains an open question. But the outcome is documented. The demonic invasion was defeated, and the planet's role in that defeat was significant. The Orc relationship with Katakan deserves its own appreciation, because it is in a strange way almost charming. Orcs appreciate toughness in the most direct, visceral, philosophical sense. Their entire culture is organized around the principle that strength matters, and that things which are genuinely strong deserve a form of respect that doesn't quite translate to other cultural frameworks, but is nonetheless consistent and sincere. Orc warlords who have fought against Katakan jungle fighters have been known to paint red bandanas on their gargants, their enormous walking war machines, as a mark of respect for enemies who gave them a genuinely worthy fight. Katakan knives are coveted objects among Orc warriors who recognize craft when they encounter it. Yet the relationship between the Katakans and the Orcs is one of the stranger ones in the 40k setting. Two warrior cultures that kill each other with complete professionalism and simultaneously maintain something approaching mutual professional respect. Part 11. The Shadow Origin. What Katakan might actually be here. We step into territory that the lore marks as speculative, but that is grounded in specific canonical sources, and that carries implications significant enough to deserve extended examination. The speculation concerns the origin of Katakan's ecosystem, specifically a theory that connects the biological systems of the most dangerous inhabited world in the galaxy to one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy, whilst in a relationship that would explain a great deal about why Katakan is the way it is. Multiple Margos biologists of the Adeptus Mechanicus, scholars who have devoted careers, and in several cases their lives to studying Katakan's biology, have advanced the following theory: that Katakan's ecosystem was seeded, whether intentionally or as a byproduct of some other activity, by the Tyranids, in the extragalactic consuming swarms that represent among the most existential threats the Milky Way has ever faced. The Great Devourer, the species that travels between galaxies, consuming all biomass it encounters, converting it into more of itself, an organism of literally cosmic scale and appetite. The evidence offered for this connection begins with specific organisms. The Katakan Devil, 30 meters of apex predator in the scorpion insectoid design space, bears detailed biological resemblance to specific Tyranid vanguard organisms. The Ravener and the Ripper, tyrannid organisms designed for infiltration and biological processing respectively, share structural details with the Devil that are too specific to be easily explained by convergent evolution. Yet the brain leaf's ability to interface with and hijack the nervous systems of host organisms mirrors the tyrannid cortex leech with such precision that sources explicitly flag it as a probable evolutionary offshoot rather than independent development. The theory proposes that in the deep past, before human colonization, before the dark age of technology, before the current recorded epoch, Catachan was seeded with tyrannid bioforms, perhaps as a deliberate forward deployment of organisms designed to begin consuming a planet's biomass in preparation for a full hive fleet. Perhaps as the aftermath of a tyrannid vessel's destruction in the system, its biological cargo dispersing onto the planet below. Perhaps through some mechanism that Imperial science hasn't yet categorized. However they arrived, tyrannid organisms, cut off from the hive mind by the vast distance from the main fleets, reverted to base animal instincts and began adapting to Catachan's native environment. Over millions of years, these organisms evolved. They changed, speciated, adapted to local conditions, interacted with whatever native life Catachan had before their arrival. But they remained, underneath their evolutionary drift, as what they fundamentally were, organisms designed by the most sophisticated biological engineering in the known universe, specifically to consume all available biomass as efficiently as possible. The cooperative ecology, the distributed biological intelligence, the total absence of passive organisms, the way the ecosystem responds to threats as a unified system, all of these characteristics are exactly what you would expect from a biosphere derived from tyrannid bioengineering, or where every organism is designed to contribute to the single goal of maximum resource extraction and consumption. If this theory is correct, then the environment the first human colonists crash-landed into was not an independently evolved hostile jungle. It was an abandoned or failed tyrannid beachhead, populated by organisms whose fundamental purpose was to strip a world of its biomass, and whose millions of years of independent evolution had refined that purpose without losing it. Yet the jungle that hunts the Catachans, that responds to their presence, adapts to their defenses, and has been trying to consume them for 10,000 years, may be doing what it was always designed to do. The Catachans just refuse to cooperate with being consumed. The counterpoint, offered by more recent sources, is that the biological connections may reflect convergent evolution in similar ecological niches rather than shared ancestry, and that the tyrannid theory is an attractive but unconfirmed narrative. This is a fair scientific objection. The 40k setting deliberately leaves certain things ambiguous. But let's sit with the implications of the theory for a moment, because they are extraordinary. If the tyrannid origin is correct, then Catachan represents something unique in human history. A people who crash-landed on a tyrannid weapon system and, instead of being consumed by it as the system was designed to accomplish, turned it into a training ground. They lived inside the Great Devourer's biological vanguard for 10,000 years and came out tougher than the vanguard. They turned an instrument of galactic-scale biological warfare into a mechanism for producing the most formidable light infantry in the Imperium of man. The universe's most efficient killing machine produced the people who taught the universe's most efficient killing machine how to fail. There is something deeply, specifically Warhammer 40k, about that. Part 12. The Philosophy of Staying. Why anyone would call this home. The most important question about Catachan, the one that the statistics and the catalogue of horrors and the cultural analysis all eventually point toward, is the simplest one. Why do the Catachans stay? Not historically. We've established that the first colonists had no choice, but their descendants have choices, or at least have as much choice as anyone in the Imperium has about where they live, which is limited but not zero. Every year, Catachans leave their world to serve in the Imperial Guard. They see other planets. They see places where the air is not trying to dissolve their lungs. where children have better than 1 in 4 odds of reaching adolescence, where you can walk outside at night without first performing threat assessment on the soundscape. And some of them must experience something when they encounter these places. Some recognition that life elsewhere is less immediately lethal, and yet the regiments come back. People go home. The population is maintained. The answer is layered and worth sitting with, because it illuminates something important about human beings generally, and about Catachan specifically. Part of it is cultural, in the deepest sense. Catachan is home. Home does not primarily mean safe or comfortable, or welcoming, those connotations that the word carries in more fortunate circumstances. Home, at its most fundamental, means the place that made you, the place that shaped every instinct and assumption and reflex you have, the place where the specific language of your existence is fully understood. The Catachans who serve in the Imperial Guard and encounter other worlds frequently find themselves in a strange position. They are supremely capable by any military standard, and simultaneously out of place in environments where the assumed background level of danger is so low that their perpetual alertness reads as anxiety or abnormality. On Catachan, that alertness is not excess, it is calibration. It is the exactly appropriate response to the environment, and the environment where that calibration feels right is Catachan. Part of it is pride, the fierce, undemonstrative, deeply internal Catachan variety. To leave Catachan permanently would be, well, in some sense, that even the Catachans themselves might struggle to articulate, to acknowledge that the planet is too much for them. The planet has never been too much for them. It kills them in staggering numbers, yes, but it has not broken them. Not in 10,000 years, not through drought or disease, or predator swarms, or demonic invasion. They have bent, they have retreated, temporarily, from settlements that fell. But they have never broken. And staying, the generational, species level, a cultural act of staying, is how they maintain that. Part of it is practical necessity. The supply arrangement with the Imperium requires a sufficient population on the surface to produce the regiments the Munitorum expects. Without a population on Catachan, there are no Catachan jungle fighters. Without Catachan jungle fighters, there are no supply ships. Without supply ships, no one can survive on Catachan anyway. It is a closed loop, OSD. And the Catachans are the people who've decided to maintain the loop rather than find a way out of it. And part of it is something that resists easy articulation, but is visible in everything we've discussed. The knowledge that Catachan produces in its people is not general knowledge. It is specific to that place, calibrated for those exact conditions, refined over a lifetime of application in the exact environment that required it. A Catachan child who reaches 10 years old carries within them more operationally relevant survival knowledge about Catachan specifically than any outsider could accumulate in years of study. Take them off that world, and some portion of what they know becomes irrelevant. Leave them there, and they are exactly what the environment has shaped them to be. Not just survivors, the descendants of survivors who survived surviving. The distilled, a concentrated product of a 10,000-year argument between human tenacity and planetary lethality, in which the planetary lethality keeps getting the better of specific battles and losing the war. The world is terrible. It has always been terrible. It will always be terrible. And it is theirs, in the way that only things you've paid for with everything you have become truly yours. They know it, in the intimate, a cellular way, that you know a thing that has tried to kill you every day of your life and hasn't managed it yet. They know its dangers because they've survived them. They know its rhythms because they've learned to breathe with them. They know what it asks of them, the full, staggering, ongoing price of existing there. And they have decided, generation after generation, that they are willing to pay it. That is what it means to be from Catachan. Chapter Part 13, What Catachan Tells Us About Humanity. When people ask what makes Warhammer 40k compelling as a setting, one honest answer is that it takes extreme premises seriously. It follows its ideas to their actual conclusions, and then invites you to sit with those conclusions and think about what they mean. It does not look away from the implications of its universe. It stares at them with the same unhurried, deliberate calm that it attributes to its best characters. Katakhan is one of the clearest illustrations of this quality in the entire setting. It takes the premise of a hostile world to an extreme that should be incompatible with inhabited civilization, and then it makes that world inhabited, and then it asks you to think about what kind of people emerge from the experience. And what emerges, what Katakhan produces, what 10,000 years of that pressure shapes, is not what pessimism would predict. The Katakhans are not broken. But they are not traumatized in the clinical sense, though they have experienced things that would traumatize people who hadn't been trained from birth to process those experiences as normal. They are not nihilistic or hopeless or consumed by the grief that their world imposes on them in enormous quantities. They are instead characterized by something that the word dignity captures better than any alternative: the specific dignity of people who know exactly who they are and what they're capable of, who have earned every single day they're still alive through their own competence and the competence of the community around them, and who carry that knowledge with a groundedness that is impossible to perform and impossible to fake. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where most human life is characterized by servitude, ignorance, suffering, and the grinding weight of an imperium that processes people as resources rather than as individuals, the Katakhans represent something unusual. They have not been domesticated, not by their hardships, which in lesser hands would produce submission rather than strength, not by the Imperium, which extracts their most capable members and pays for the privilege, but which does not otherwise control them in the granular, a penetrating way that it controls more dependent populations. The Katakhans have maintained, in the midst of everything, the fundamental autonomy of people who have not been broken, who have decided, generation after generation, that the terms of their existence are acceptable to them. This is the thing about Katakhan that sits underneath all the bestiary entries and the survival statistics and the tactical assessments. It is a place that by every reasonable metric should not be inhabited, while it is inhabited by choice, or the nearest thing to choice that their circumstances allow, by people who know exactly what they're choosing. That knowledge, that clear-eyed, direct, unflinching understanding of what they are and what they face and what they have decided to do about it, is the most valuable thing Katakhan has ever produced. More valuable than the regiments it sends to the Munitorum, more valuable than the toxins and biospecimens it trades, more valuable even than the legends it generates. The jungle will win, in the end, for any specific settlement. It always does. The walls will eventually be breached, and the survivors will move on, and they will find a new place and start again. But the Katakhans will not stop.
Sure to hit
the next generation will build the next walls.
Share button, whatever you want.
The children who
give me some feedback if there's any, and yeah, sleep well.